Good morning and welcome back to Gardening with ADHD. Now, when we think of gardening, typically we think of the flowers or the bushes around our home. Maybe you think of that piece of dirt in your parents' backyard where they tried to grow something when you were a kid. I know I do. But as I've gotten into gardening, I've noticed that a lot of the people that I watch and I learn from use raised bed gardening, and so I've decided to do the same with mine. Today I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about why I've chosen raised beds and also how I've constructed them. So first off, why raised beds? The first option is, or not option, but the first reason is for control. In a suburban environment that has for years been inundated by weeds, trees, pesticides, and other, we'll say, not garden-friendly activities, raised beds will give me a lot more control over my garden and what's going into the plants. The other reason is that it's customizable. You can build a raised garden bed out of all sorts of material. You can do it out of metal. You can do it out of concrete blocks, as I've got here. I'll talk about that in a minute. You can do it like me, out of 2x4s and roofing panels. There are so many different options for what you can do to build a garden bed that you can make it yours. So, the other main reason is because of appearance. I don't want just a patch of dirt in the ground. As I've been developing my garden, I really like the fact that we've actually made it a place where we can just relax, and my wife and I can sit together, or we can sit with friends and just enjoy being outside because we've made it look nice. We've made it a home outside of home, as it were. So when I was looking at building my garden beds, what did I want? Well, first off, I wanted size. I wanted garden beds that were big, that I could put in as many different types of vegetables or fruits that I wanted, or just a lot of something that I want. In my particular case, I have about 9 pepper plants in the garden beds because I like spicy food. So I like the fact that I can just put in things and try some different options. The second thing that I wanted durability. I don't want to replace the beds very often. I know there's kits that you can buy. To me, I don't think they're that durable. I could be wrong. I've obviously never used one, but I want my garden beds to last. I figure if I get 5 years out of one of my garden beds, then that will be a success. But I'm actually hoping that I can get more out of it. And the third thing that I wanted is this actually came later, but I found that I want some options to experiment. I want to be able to try some different things in the garden that don't necessarily match up with square foot gardening. So by being able to build different garden beds, different sizes, I can try out those things and see how well they work for me. So how did I build my garden beds? The first thing that I did was I came up with a plan. Now, you can go and buy the kits, like I said, and the kits are already pre-sized for 4 foot by 4 foot, or 4 foot by 8 foot, or smaller, or pots, or whatever it is. But I literally grabbed a piece of graph paper. I know you won't be able to see any details, but this is literally my piece of paper that I came up with a plan on how I wanted to build the beds. From the size, from the height, what additional supports I would need, and I used this to calculate how much material that I would need. There are lots of places that you can go online to find plans, and they'll tell you exactly what to buy. For me, though, I liked being able to come up with a plan that would fit my needs. My garden beds are 3 foot by 8 foot, which is large enough to hold a lot of plants. But as you've probably seen on some of the blog videos, they're just the right size to fit in my yard without needing to do a lot of redesign. I do have a lawn that is getting better, much more enjoyable to play around in, and by planning the beds out, I could actually make it so that I could enjoy both the lawn and my garden. Another thing is by coming up with a plan, I made something where it's large enough, but it's also still usable. As you can see, my beds are basically up against a block wall, so I can really only come at them from 3 different sides. So by keeping them to the size that they're at, I can still reach the entire garden bed without having to climb in it, basically. My wife is not as tall, so it's not as easy, but for the most part, we can reach anywhere in the beds without too much trouble. Now, all of the materials that I used were available at Home Depot. When you're coming up with your plan, go to whatever store you're going to be buying material from and look around. See what material is available. Some of these things, I didn't go into it knowing this was the particular piece of material that I was going to buy. I went and I looked to see what they had and to see what would meet my needs, what would actually work with the ideas that I had. And they actually modified and changed some of my ideas as I progressed with it. So, like I said, come up with a plan and look for material that you're going to easily be able to obtain. With that being said, I technically only needed 3 tools in order to assemble the entire garden bed. The first tool is this one back here. This is called a miter saw. I use this to cut down the 2x4s. Buying large 2x4s obviously made it easier because number one, it's cheaper. Number 2, I could, again, customize the size that I needed. The second thing that I needed was a drill. I technically used 2. This is just a regular drill or driver, and you can use it for putting in screws. You can use it for making holes, whatever it is that you need. This is an impact driver, so this is basically just for driving screws. If you have one or the other of these, that'll be just fine. You don't actually need both. And then the third thing that I used was this angle grinder. Angle grinder is usually for cutting metal, but I also used it for cutting the plastic paneling that I'll show you here in a minute. One thing to keep in mind with tools, so if you're like me, you probably have a lot of these tools already. I like coming up with ideas where I can just build something myself. I'm not always very successful with it, but I at least try. So I've managed to collect a large amount of tools over the years. For this particular project, I didn't actually have to buy any new tools. In your case, what you may want to do is look around in your community, whether it's church or school or the neighborhood Facebook group, whatever it is, ask around, and chances are you'll be able to borrow many, if not all, of these tools if you don't already have them yourself. And if you live in my area, absolutely let me know. I would even be willing to help. So, what materials did I need? Now, first off, keep in mind that the materials that I used are based off of my plans for my garden beds. You're going to want to figure out how large a bed that you want and plan accordingly. I will also admit I may have over-engineered these, but I like the way that they came out, and so I have no regrets. One thing when you are making your plan, keep in mind that at the home stores, wood is what's called dimensional lumber. It will say that it's a 2 foot or 2 inch by 4 inch piece of wood, but due to its finishing, it usually ends up about ½ an inch smaller in each direction. So when you're coming up with your plan, when you're figuring out how much material you need, keep in mind that you may have to compensate for that. So also when cutting with the miter saw, keep in mind that the blade will take off about 1/8 an inch of material. So if you try, it's not a lot, but if you do try to pre-measure every single cut on your piece of wood before you cut the first piece, you will end up with your cut marks being off because you're obviously shortening the amount of, or lessening the amount of material that you have when cutting it down. So what I've done is I actually would just cut each individual piece or measure each individual piece and cut it each time. It was a lot slower, it took extra time, but I was able to actually be a bit more accurate that way. So for my main boxes, the primary material that I used was 2x4s. This one is actually one that has been in my yard for 5 years or so. It's been a long time. And the reason that I'm showing it to you is because this is not pressure treated. Part of what I said is I wanted durability, and many times you will see that you do need pressure treated wood. And if you are in wetter areas, you'll definitely want to look into that, just because pressure treated is going to be more resistant to rot. For me though, this has been out baked in the sun for years now, and it's just fine. So so that's what I used. I just used a plain 2x4s. Now, admittedly, it hasn't been exposed to all the water like it would be with a regular garden. But again, if I get at least 5 years out of this, I'll call it successful. So for the 2x4s, I needed 11 of those. That's the bulk of the material that I used on the garden beds. In the corners, I got a 10-foot 4x4, which I cut into 2.5-foot sections so that I actually had some legs that I could put into the ground to keep it in place. I used 3-inch deck screws. You can buy this in this case, this is a 1-pound box. I had originally bought a 5-pound box, and I used it all. It was great. So with those, I do recommend that you get screws with that use a hex bit for driving. I literally destroyed about 4 or 5 Phillips head bits when I was making some of my garden beds. So the hex bits I've had 0 issues with. I also got these 12-foot roofing panels. It's like corrugated steel, but it appears to be a plastic of some sort. I got it in 12-foot lengths because that way, with each side being 8 foot long and the short sides being 3 feet, I had plenty of material to work with. And that's where the angle grinder came in. I would just attach the paneling to the wall of the garden bed and then just use the angle grinder to cut it off. Now in the corners, I also used some of this metal drip edge that you put on your roof. I used this because I didn't want the soil and water in direct contact in the corners. So this, I just slid it between the corrugated paneling that I just showed you and the wood, and it's just held in place by pressure. It actually worked really well. Now, there are options for your garden beds. Some of them I'm planning on adding later. Some of them I'm not going to be able to add because it's too late at this point, as far as I'm concerned. One of the first ones is drip lines. If you don't want to water by hand, it's not hard to install drip lines. I will probably do that at some point. Right now I'm still watering by hand, but you can do that to just put your watering on a timer. If you live in an area with a lot of ground animals, rodents, groundhogs, squirrels, whatever, maybe not squirrels because they're in trees, but separate issue. I have heard some people talk about putting chicken wire in the bottom of their beds before they actually fill it with dirt. In our area, as I go out on walks in the afternoon, I see lots of groundhog holes or ground squirrel holes, whatever they are. But I haven't seen any in my yard, so I'm not worried yet. We'll start worrying if we start seeing vegetables go down instead of up. And yeah, you can put trellising on the back. I've used cattle panels for that. I'll talk about that more in another video. And as I said, if you're in a wetter climate, you'll want to look at pressure treated wood. One reason I built my beds the way that I did is I didn't want the wood to be directly exposed to the dirt and all of the water. So keep that in mind when you're coming up with your plan. For my smaller garden boxes, if you've seen those on my blog videos, those are just out of plain 2x4s. Two of them are recycled. One of them I actually went and bought some new 2x4s for. Those I will not be surprised if they don't last as long because the soil and the water is in direct contact. But we'll see. And for those, I did put some 2x4s in the corners, dug into the ground, and just to keep those in place. For the larger beds, I did dig about a 6-foot trench all the way around because the paneling is a little bit more than 2 feet, which is how tall my beds are. And so that trench let me put the whole thing in the ground to keep it in place. The final option is cinder blocks. My sister-in-law actually gave me, or reminded me of this idea. I'd seen it from someone else. And these are I'm gonna clear out some rocks and put these directly on the ground. Just level them out and fill the inside with soil. One thing I like about these with the cinder blocks is you can see it's got the holes in it, and you can actually use those as little planter pots. So we're gonna try some different things. This is a pure experiment garden bed. I have some extra soil, and so I wanted to do something with it as opposed to just leaving it in the bucket waiting. So let's see. All right, so last thing, I want to just show a couple of the techniques that I used to actually build the beds. So all right, we'll look at this. So right here, I made an L piece out of 2 pieces of 2x4. And I did that so that I could screw directly into the 4x4 in the corner. I wanted my inside measurement to be 3 foot by 8 foot. So in reality, these These beds from outside edge to outside edge are a little closer to 3 feet 8 inches and 8 feet 8 inches. I put additional 2x4s down the side, both here on the end and on the long edge. And I did that just because I wanted to make sure that it was supported against the weight of all of the soil in the garden bed. But basically that's it. They're just simple, flat joints. I didn't make any fancy cuts, no angles. Everything is just straight. But I really like how they came out. This first bed has actually been here for about a year, so you can see how the weather has affected the wood. And then on these orange beds, these have been here for a few months now. I think I built them in February. So overall, that is what I did for my garden beds. I hope you got some good information about that, or out of that, and I hope that it's given you some inspiration on what you can do in your own garden. So, as always, comment down below. Let me know what it is that you did for your gardens. If you've got any ideas on how I should improve mine as people are tearing through the neighborhood. But otherwise, I hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. Bye.